these two, and then I'm going to start asking you some questions. And my introductions are short. So the artist whose work you just saw, someone can sit next to me. He's currently based in New York.
Can you speak up, please?
Yes. How does this sound? Is that okay?
Better.
Okay. So he's currently based in New York. Previously he lived and worked in the Netherlands for 4 years, partially at the Rijks Academy. And so as I mentioned, variations of this of the 3 videos have been exhibited and performed throughout Europe, also in different places in the United States and in Toronto. Sung's work was also included in the Gwangju Biennale in 2004, the 2008 Berlin Biennale, in Manifesta 8 and Media City Seoul, both in 2010. Currently on view he has a piece on view in an interesting show called The Other Tradition at Wiels in Brussels, and at Kunsthal Basel, a solo show. And then he's preparing exhibitions for the Tate Modern with If I Can't Dance, right? Yeah, with a group called If I Can't Dance, I Don't Want to Be Part of Your Revolution. And Sung collaborates on a fundamental aspect of the work, which is the music, with composer and performer daughter, or David Michael Di Gregorio, who is right there. Thanks for being here. Jonas is a seminal figure in American post-war contemporary art, and she has been represented in Documenta's 5, 6. So, can I ask you to guide people to the other side so they can come in? Hi. If you sneak over here, we're all very cozily squeezed together. So Joan has been exhibited in the major international exhibitions such as Documenta 5, 6, 7, and 11, and has had solo shows or performed at such institutions as Tia Beacon, The Kitchen, Tate Modern, Haus der Kultur der Welt, Berlin, Reina Sofia in Madrid, MAC in Barcelona, Le Plateau in Paris, and the Renaissance Society, University of Chicago, and many, 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 many more places. The first American solo retrospective was actually here at the Queen's Museum of Art. So in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, Joan is one of the greatest living American artists. And you can say that she's the inventor of a kind of zone of performance and video, which has been fully assimilated today, and in which many artists work, of which Sung, in my opinion, is one of the foremost young practitioners. So she's here today, also as a friend of the Queen's Museum. As I mentioned, she had her first solo retrospective here, and of Sung's. They share a great deal artistically and in terms of chosen forms and the way they use literary and cinematic and more broadly cultural material. And before she was his friend, she was his teacher. But first in 1998 and later in 2002, 2003. Is that right?
Something.
So what I'm going to do now is I have some questions for Sung, some questions for Joan. Many of the questions will be for both of them, and I encourage both of you to chime in if you have ideas about what the other are saying. And then eventually I'll just open it up to your questions. So this is a question for Sung. So in Summer Days in Keijo, which we just saw, you're taking on your own city. You were born in Seoul. Right? So you're taking on your own city kind of from a foreigner's point of view, and you're replacing yourself with, in a way, 2 different people, with someone from 1937 from Sweden, and someone who you know well, who is a Dutch woman, who is a kind of your stand-in. And Joan, actually, you've also you've also been in your work, of course, but you've also replaced yourself as a protagonist. And I just wanted to ask about the idea of the stand-in, and to ask you guys to talk a little bit about being in the work and not being in the work.
Would you like to? I think, well, I got your questions beforehand, so I wrote some notes, but I'll try to pull it out, but I'm sort of improvising as well. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I think you asked about substitution, and I thought about how my background is in mathematics, but you don't need to know the word substitution. You don't need to know mathematics to know the word substitution. But often in mathematics, substitution is where you have a complicated setup where you cannot solve the problems unless you make this you replace this by another word such as A. So you print, although it's a complicated subject, you pretend as if it's just an A, and then so that you can go on a journey to solve this problem.
That's the first step.
Yeah. Well, that's what the substitution is, and I think when I used this text that was written in 1937 by Stan Bergman about this guy going to Korea to live there for 2 years to collect wild animals for the Swedish Natural History Museum. And for me to read it now, it's a loaded subject. And also, a person traveling to another sort of so-called foreign land is a loaded genre in film, and the travelogue, the history of travelogues. And then there was my friend, Mika van der Voort, who's a photographer. And I don't talk about it in this work, but she is dealing with her country's history. She's Dutch, and relationship with South Africa, as a colonizer's history. And I didn't want to get into this kind of specifics of these people, but I thought of it as sort of like a very broad stroke of meeting place. There's somebody who I work with, and somebody who is playing this role. And then there's this story, the writer, Stan Bergman's text. Well, in that way, but obviously there's me in it, because I'm seeing, I'm neither the writer who's going back to Korea because I grew up there, but in a way, I am thinking of the gesture of that, of looking in, or going into the foreign land, or getting to know the city through landmarks.
And you're also the person behind the camera, is that right?
Yeah. So that's something I can talk about.
Well, I could just quickly say from the very beginning, I didn't want to see Joan Jonas myself. So from the very beginning, I thought of the person in the work as being someone else. I had to distance myself from that performer in order to play a role. I didn't want to have the biography, play my own biography. And so I used masks and costumes to transform myself. And then just over the years in general, as I got older, I didn't enjoy looking at, I performed a lot in my own work, but I didn't enjoy looking at myself so much because I have to edit the work and shoot it and everything. And so I began to work with, I always was interested in the idea of the double as a concept, the two. And so then I began to work with a younger performer who played my double, who was my double in the work, and played what I might have played and also played me. So we were always together working against each other and with each other. And in general, that's how I work with. I mean, it's very simple. It has other things too, but I don't know.
So both of you just said, you said I didn't want to get into the specifics, and you said I didn't want to get into autobiography. And I think that there's an interesting, there's a sort of an existing taboo of sorts against autobiography in certain contemporary work, and yet there's a different attitude towards it generationally, for sure. If you were thinking about this in the late 60s, early 70s, and you're thinking about this today, can you characterize the difference in the attitude towards autobiography when you were thinking about it for the first time and when you're thinking about it now?
Well, when I was thinking about it for the first time, I was thinking more in terms of, I was very interested in film, and also, I'd never worked in theater, but I was also interested in the theatrical and in the idea of disguise. And I think in the 70s and early 80s, people began to tell their own life story. I was never interested in doing that. And I'd say there was the idea of the personal, and this had to do with the feminist movement at the time. but it didn't mean that you had to. So a lot of women were telling their own personal stories, actually. So I was interested in revealing psychology, my own psychology, in a very personal way. And it made the audience uncomfortable, which I found interesting. But I wasn't interested in telling a story, saying I was born, blah, 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 and all that, at that time. So it's a little different. But my story is in all the work, in a way, but disguised. I believe in disguising it. But that's true of many writers as well.
I think for me it was more because, like for example, in this exhibition, in the room series, this is a whole series, so this is the last piece in the room series, and if you see downstairs, there's in the voiceover there's an eye, and then it resembles more of my story. A lot of people, like in the dog videos, which is one of the pieces about father and son relationship, it keeps saying I, and here where I'm from, here where I'm living, my father used to do these things, and then often after a film screening, people ask me about my personal stories. And I think that is not necessarily the case with a lot of texts in the literature that you read, but I think in this kind of content, video, like a museum, or art context, if you start to use I and start to talk about a personal account, it's immediately associated with your life, which is natural. But I was sort of approaching more from that pronouns I and how I can be used and how I is received by the audience. And once you start, or is there some kind of, as you say, a taboo? Because there are different ways of telling a story. Another question that I think we wanted to ask about was the journey between like how to see this exhibition. Where you take the 7 train and see all these people, which is a very different demographics, and then you go into the park, and then you go through this street and you see this museum, which was constructed for the World Fair, and then you enter the museum and you see panorama, which is a very specific way of seeing a city or to describe a map. It's very different from telling a story of a person who's living in one of these buildings and telling personal account with his experience of living in the city. So, but there's a dynamics, I think, one, whether to call this a personal story or episode or anecdote or something that can be archived or objective or something that has more power in terms of documentation. And I was interested in the dynamics between these things. And
No, I'm sorry, you finished?
yeah.
Well, I was just thinking about this desire in the art world for people when they hear the word I, because I work with an Icelandic saga. It was a story of a woman. It's a medieval saga, and there was a woman who had 4 dreams. So the dreams are told in the first person, I. Everybody thought they were my dreams. I mean, so many people, I had to fight against that. They thought it was my dreams. It was so ridiculous, in a way. But that happens in the art world, that people have to make this association. And also, they hear even though I didn't use my voice, like, it's interesting, when I see your pieces, I hear your voice, and I look at it and I think, oh, that's Sun. I recognize you in your work. So I think there's a lot of information. We don't see ourselves being on the inside, have other people read our work. You know what I mean? So when the audience reads our work, especially if they know us, they recognize it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's that.
And then there was, I think, for example, that was one of the main reason to make this one as part of the piece, but as in terms of the substitution, it was important for me to make a piece that is the same in a way, but uses different character, who's a writer from a past, and then who's a different person, a woman from a different culture.
When you say that is the same, you mean that is part of this grouping of videos? Or?
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to see the same gesture done by different people, so that it's not always, it doesn't get into this like meaning.